We're going to skip ahead to the gospel lesson because this is one of those Sundays when I'm really jealous of my friends and colleagues who have no liturgy in their church, where they come and sing for 20 minutes and then the preacher gets like 30 to 40 minutes to preach. I want to do that today. Don't worry, Jim. It's not going to happen. But I would like to do that today. So the story is a familiar one today. It's a story that you know as the prodigal son, which is in Luke. And Luke always does a thing where Jesus tells his parables, where there's a parable generally about a male protagonist and a female protagonist. And in this instance, that's true. There is a story of the lost sheep, the shepherd who goes and looks for the one, leaves the 99 and goes and looks for the one. Now remember that if you owned those sheep and your shepherd left 99 behind to go and look for the one, you would be firing that shepherd, because it doesn't make any sense for anybody to do that unless you're that one sheep, right? Then the next one, the story that is the female protagonist, is the woman with the lost coin, who searches her whole house to find her one lost coin. And in this instance, Luke does something different. There is a third story. And the third story is the story that we usually call the prodigal son. But remember that those titles aren't in the original scripture. Those are titles that somebody has given us. And probably they've given us the wrong title for this one. Probably should be called the parable of the father and his two sons. Given the context of this parable, it really is probably about the older son, because in this instance, Jesus is surrounded by Pharisees, people, good, hearty, religious people who are saying, Jesus, you're eating with sinners and tax collectors. You're a dirty, rotten bum. And Jesus tells this story about the father and his two sons. Sounds like this from the 15th chapter of Luke. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. Jesus said, there was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided the property between them. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off, and he went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against you, against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out the robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now the elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the slaves and asked, "What's going on?" And he replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry, that older brother, and he refused to go in. And his father came out to him and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then his father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So here's the good news. I'm celebrating with you tomorrow, 1 year anniversary. Yay. But here's what else I've learned over the course of this week. I am really smart. No, that's not really true. But I am experienced enough now, after 20 years of doing this, that I can tell you about trends in the church. See, right now, what's hip to talk about are the nuns. You've heard me talk about the nuns, not the ones in habits, but the N-O-N-E-S, the nuns. People who claim no religious affiliation. Everybody wants to talk about these people and figure out a way to get them into the church. Statistics claim that 72% of Wheelingites, Wheelingers, Wheeling residents, call themselves nuns. That is an unbelievably high number. It's unreal to me. And people say that those are the ones that we're supposed to be focusing on. But let me tell you, when I first started doing this, people weren't saying that. People were saying the people that we really ought to be focusing to and gearing our services to and being friendly toward are people called seekers. Do you remember this? Some of you are old enough to remember. I'm watching you shake your heads. So we used to have this thing where we had to develop seeker-friendly services. And there were these seeker-friendly churches all around. Willow Creek was a big seeker-friendly church in the Chicago area. And Rick Warren's church, Saddleback Church, was a seeker-friendly church in California. All these huge mega churches were telling us we had to be seeker-friendly. So I looked up what seeker was to make sure that I was telling you the right thing. And here's what it says. Ready? The state of a person who is unsatisfied with her current available religious affiliation and is carrying out exchanges in search of a more satisfying affiliation, system, belief system, or practice. Roof reported that seekers are characterized by their quest or journey mentality regarding religion. The term is also typically associated with those particularly interested in spirituality and internal religion. Some organizations have begun to adopt this language and attempt to be seeker-friendly. Yes, they have. Don't you love that? Seekers. People who are dissatisfied with their religious affiliation, as opposed to nuns who just don't care about their religious affiliation. And so we used to do all this stuff to try to gear everything we did to seekers. But here's what we found out. It didn't work. And one of the reasons it didn't work was because we discovered that these people these seekers, which are sometimes called people these are the people who love Jesus but not the church, right? People who are spiritual but not religious, those folks. We discovered that what these people were seeking, that we were supposed to be offering them, was something they couldn't define. They didn't know what they were looking for. And anytime you don't know what you're looking for, it makes it very difficult to find it. Oh. Now, don't get me wrong. There's places in Scripture all over the place where it says we are to seek God. The Psalms are full of that language. If you seek God, God will be faithful and come to you. Right? I cried out to God, and God answered my plea. There's a place for that, where we as human beings go seeking after God. But if we are to look at today's parable in a different light, from the light and perspective of what the Father is supposed to be telling us, it is not us who seek the Father, but the Father who seeks us. So you have this wonderful story of this snotty, snot-nosed brat of a younger son who says to his father essentially, I wish you were dead, give me my stuff now. I'm not waiting around for you to croak, I need it. And he takes all the stuff and he goes and he squanders his money. And the older brother, we learn later, is very, very angry. And he's mad, and he's jealous, and he hates that younger brother because he's taken what should have been his and what was his family's and disrespected his father and misused that fortune that was offered to him. So that's the story based on the sons. But the story, if we're looking at it today, isn't about the sons, it's about the father. There's this beautiful thing, the younger son decides to go home because he's starving to death. Isn't it lovely the way a crisis always compels us to go and seek the Father? And he's starving to death and all the way home. And he's far away from home. You know how we know that? Because he's feeding pigs. And no Palestinian Jew would have pigs, so he's outside the land that he should be living in. He's gone far away from home. And he's walking home the whole time. Father, forgive me, for I know not what I do. Father, forgive me. I have sinned against you. And as he's walking, not paying attention, he approaches his home, and the story says, and the father sees him from far off. Don't miss this. You can't see somebody from far off if you're not looking for them. The Father is standing in wait, waiting for his lost son to come home. And he doesn't just walk to get to him. He hikes up his robe as far as he possibly can, and he runs to his son. And he embraces him. And let me tell you, the Middle Eastern patriarch would never hike up his robe. For one thing, underwear hadn't been invented then. And that sounds kind of funny, but there really is something to that. It would be disgraceful, dishonoring, unheard of for the patriarch to run at all, let alone to a disgruntled, disrespectful son. that seem strange to you? Think about when you have ever seen your dads run, or you who are dads. When have your kids ever seen you run? Unless you were big athletes, big coaches, probably not much. As I thought about this, I can only remember 3 times in my life seeing my dad run. 1, I was on the purple bike with the sparkly banana seat, learning how to ride, and he was behind me, running after me, teaching me how to ride a bike. I remember that because I looked around behind him at one point, and he had stopped running because the bike was outspeeding his run. That's one time I remember him running. Second time, my brother and I were playing catch, and my dad was in the garage. We were out in the yard. He was teaching me how to field pop flies. You know, when you field a pop fly, you put your glove up like this, cover it with your hand, comes in, got it, right? He popped that ball straight up, and I watched it, and he said, put your glove up, hold your hand over, watch it come in, you got it. And I went like this, and I forgot to put my glove up. It's the only bloody nose I've ever had in my life. And my dad heard it from the garage and came running. 3, I was grown, and in college my nephew was somewhere between a toddler and a preschooler. He was all wrapped up, you know how they do with kids, in his snowsuit. And they sat him on a sled, and he was on his way down the hill. And it very quickly became apparent that that sled had gotten away from him. And I watched my dad run after that child. And he picked him up off of that sled, and just before it was too late, that sled went off of our hill into the road and on into a tree. And there stood my dad after running after that child with him embraced and safe. See, here's what I know. The father runs to his children when they need to learn. The father runs to his children when they are hurt and wounded. The father runs to his children when they need saving. The father in the story of the father and his 2 sons actually runs to both his children in the story. The one who is far off, he hikes up his robe and runs to, but the other brother, the sullen brother, the sulky brother, the religious brother, the one who probably represents all of us and won't go in to celebrate the younger, the father comes to him too. Are you getting this? A patriarch like that man doesn't go to people, he has people come to him. And yet he goes to the older son and says, listen, this party, this celebration, this excitement, this is not about you, and it is not about your brother. It is about me. It is about me wanting to offer compassion and hospitality and goodness and joy to all those around. Let us celebrate, dear older brother, that your younger one who was lost has been found. There's a technique in reading Scripture and Bible study we have to pay attention to here, and that is that if a word or a phrase repeats itself throughout the text or throughout the Bible, we have to pick it up and note it. The story today says that the Father saw the Son, and while he was still far off, the Father went to him. The other place we hear that language of while we were still far off is in the book of Ephesians, when it says, and while we were still far off from God, Jesus Christ brought us peace, brought peace to those who were near and peace to those who were far away. And through that peace of Jesus Christ's cross, we now have access to God the Father. Thanks be to God. Amen.